The snow was falling in thick, relentless curtains the night Serena stood on the corner of Maple and Fifth with her 3-year-old son pressed against her chest, whispering a prayer she wasn't sure anyone could hear anymore. She had exactly $14 in her pocket, a diaper bag with 2 diapers left, and a heart so broken it barely had the strength to keep beating. She had nowhere to go, and for the first time in her life, she said those words out loud. Not to a friend, not to a caseworker, not to a phone screen, but to the cold, indifferent night itself, her voice trembling and small. "We have nowhere to go, baby," she whispered into her son's woolen hat, pressing her lips to the soft fabric. And little Theo, only 3 years old, clutched his teddy bear tighter and said nothing, because even he could feel that something in the world had cracked wide open. If this story is already pulling at your heart, please hit that like button right now and subscribe to our channel. Leave a comment telling us where in the world you're watching from, because kindness has no borders, and stories like this one remind us why second chances matter. Share this video with someone who needs to be reminded that even the coldest nights can end in warmth. Serena had not always been this woman standing in the snow. There was a time, not so long ago, when she had been someone entirely different. She had been a graphic designer at a small but beloved advertising firm in the city, the kind of woman who color-coded her planner and kept fresh flowers on her desk every Monday morning. She had a modest apartment with yellow curtains that she had sewn herself, a cat named Biscuit who slept on the radiator, and a life that, while not glamorous, had felt entirely her own. She had built it piece by careful piece after aging out of the foster care system at 18 with nothing but a garbage bag of belongings and a stubborn refusal to become a statistic. Then Marcus came into her life, charming and certain, the kind of man who knew exactly what to say and exactly when to say it. He arrived at the edges of her carefully constructed world like a warm wind. And Serena, who had spent most of her childhood being passed from house to house and learning not to need anyone, found herself needing him with a ferocity that frightened her. When she discovered she was pregnant with Theo, Marcus had held her face in his hands and told her everything was going to be different now. He had meant it, she believed. Or maybe she had just needed so badly to believe it that the difference ceased to matter. The reality of Marcus unraveled slowly, then all at once. There were small cruelties first, a dismissive word here, a door slammed there, the way he would spend entire paychecks without warning and then look at her like she was the one being unreasonable when she asked where the rent money had gone. Then came the controlling. Her phone checked, her friendships quietly discouraged, her confidence dismantled one comment at a time until the woman who had once sewn her own curtains and kept fresh flowers on her desk could barely recognize herself in the mirror. By the time Theo was 18 months old, Serena had quit her job because Marcus had made it impossible to keep. And by the time Theo turned 2, she had lost the apartment because Marcus had stopped paying rent entirely and refused to tell her until the eviction notice arrived on the door. She had tried leaving twice before the night she finally did. The first time, Marcus had wept and promised, and she had been too exhausted and too isolated to believe she had another option. The second time, she had packed a bag and gotten as far as the bus station before he showed up, calm and cold-eyed in a way that frightened her more than the weeping ever had. But the third time, the night he raised his hand to her for the first time, and Theo, standing in the doorway in his pajamas holding his teddy bear, began to cry. Something inside Serena simply closed. Not broke, closed. With a quiet, absolute finality that she recognized from somewhere deep in her childhood. That place inside a person that decides it is done being hurt. She had packed what she could carry, she had taken Theo's hand, and she had walked out into a February night that was dropping into the single digits with nowhere to go and no one left to call, because Marcus had systematically dismantled every relationship she had, and the women's shelter 2 miles away had a 3-week waiting list. And the $14 in her pocket was what remained of the emergency 20 she had been hiding in Theo's diaper bag for months, waiting for exactly this moment. She had been walking for 40 minutes when she stopped on the corner of Maple and Fifth, outside a restaurant she had never been inside, in a part of the city she didn't know well. Her arms were burning from carrying Theo, who had fallen into a half-sleep against her shoulder, his small weight both a comfort and an agony. The snow was serious now, the kind that accumulates fast and makes the city go quiet in a way that feels less like peace and more like erasure. Serena was trying to remember if there was a 24-hour diner nearby, somewhere she could sit with Theo and be warm for a few hours without spending the $14 she might need for bus fare tomorrow, when the restaurant door opened and a man stepped out into the cold. His name was Callum, and he was 34 years old, and he had been having what he privately considered the worst week of his adult life, which in the grand accounting of things amounted to a failed business deal, a flooded kitchen, and the realization that he had been so consumed by work for the last 3 years that he had entirely forgotten how to simply exist in the world. He had gone to dinner alone that night because his apartment felt suffocating, and the silence in it had a particular quality that he had recently begun to find alarming. Not peaceful, but hollow, like the silence of a room that used to hold something important. He was buttoning his coat and looking at his phone when he stepped outside and nearly walked directly into Serena. He almost kept walking. He would think about that later, how close he had come to simply stepping around her, offering a reflexive apology, and disappearing back into the city the way people do 100 times a day. But something made him stop. Maybe it was the way she was standing, very still, with a quality of stillness that wasn't calm, but was the opposite of calm. The stillness of someone who has run out of movement and doesn't know what comes next. Maybe it was the child asleep on her shoulder, the small sneakered feet dangling, the worn teddy bear clutched in a tiny fist. Maybe it was the snow, which was now falling heavily enough that in another few minutes, neither of them would be comfortable standing in it. Whatever it was, Callum stopped, and he looked at her, and he asked if she was all right. Serena almost said yes. The word was right there, automatic and ready, the way it always was. The word she had learned to say so early in life that it had become less a response and more a reflex. A small wall she could throw up between herself and the concern of strangers. But she was so tired. She was so profoundly, bone-deep tired that the wall simply didn't go up this time. And instead, she looked at this man she had never met, standing in the falling snow outside a restaurant she had never been inside, and she told him the truth. She told him she had just left a bad situation and that she didn't have anywhere to go tonight and that she had a 3-year-old and $14 and she wasn't sure what she was supposed to do next. She expected the way people usually responded to this kind of honesty from a stranger. The uncomfortable shuffle, the vague offer of a hotline number, the retreat behind the glass wall of someone else's emergency. She had seen it before, when she was a teenager aging out of the system, when she had needed help and asked for it, and watched people calculate the cost of caring before deciding they couldn't afford it. She was already bracing for it, already preparing to say never mind and keep walking when Callum said something she had not expected. He said he had a spare room. He said it simply and directly, without ceremony or performance, the way someone might state a plain fact about the weather. He said he knew that was a strange thing to say to someone he'd never met, and that he understood completely if she didn't feel safe accepting, and that he could also help her find a hotel or a shelter or whatever she needed. But he had a spare room, and it had a door with a lock on it, and she and her son were welcome to it for as long as they needed, and he meant that without condition or expectation of anything in return. Serena stared at him for a long moment, the snow falling between them, Theo stirring slightly against her shoulder and then settling back into sleep. She had spent so many years being failed by people who were supposed to help her. The system, the caseworkers, the foster families who returned her when she got too old or too difficult, the man who had promised everything and delivered ruin, that she had arrived at a private conviction that the world was not, at its core, a place where people helped each other without wanting something back. She had built her whole careful life on that conviction, on self-sufficiency and solitude, and the yellow curtains she had sewn herself because she would not need anyone to sew them for her. But she was standing in the snow with $14 and a sleeping toddler, and she was so cold she couldn't feel her fingers. And this man was looking at her not with calculation or pity, but with something she didn't immediately have a word for. A plain, steady human recognition, as though he simply saw her, not her situation or her usefulness, but her. The actual person standing there exhausted and trying not to come apart. She said yes. Callum's apartment was warm and smelled of wood polish and old books, the kind of place that had been lived in by someone with a quiet inner life. He made tea without asking and heated soup from a can. And Serena sat at his kitchen table with Theo asleep on a folded blanket on the couch and both hands wrapped around a mug, and she felt something she had almost forgotten was possible. The sensation of being, for a single moment, simply held by the ordinary goodness of a warm room and a hot drink and someone who had asked nothing from her. They talked for a long time that night, longer than either of them expected. Callum told her about his own losses, a father who had died 3 years ago, and a company he had been building in grief, and who knew which one had caused the other. And Serena told him about the foster care, and the firm, and the yellow curtains, and Marcus, more than she had told anyone in years, her voice steady and matter-of-fact in the way of someone who has learned to carry their history without putting it down. He listened with the particular quality of attention that is rare in people and more valuable than almost anything else. The kind of listening that doesn't rush toward solutions or pivot to its own story, but simply stays, present and patient, in the space of what's being said. The spare room had a quilt on the bed and a small lamp on the nightstand, and a door with a lock exactly as Callum had said. Serena put Theo down on the bed and sat beside him in the lamplight for a long time before she lay down herself. And she thought about the fact that tomorrow she would need to start making phone calls and locating resources and building, again, from nothing. And she thought about how many times she had done that already in her life and how tired she was of doing it. And then she thought about the moment on the corner when she had said the truth out loud for the first time in as long as she could remember, and how the world had not ended when she did, and how a door had opened instead. In the weeks that followed, Serena stayed in that spare room with Theo and worked with a quiet ferocity that Callum came to recognize and deeply respect. She contacted the domestic violence organization that ran the shelter and got herself on the proper lists. She reached out to her old employer and discovered that her position had been filled, but that there was freelance work available, and she took all of it. She applied for emergency housing assistance and attended every appointment without exception, bringing Theo in his red jacket and his gray hat and his teddy bear, sitting in waiting rooms with the particular dignity of someone who will not be made small by circumstance. Callum asked nothing of her and offered everything available: the kitchen, the Wi-Fi, the address for her mail, the occasional evening of quiet company over takeout containers when Theo had gone to sleep. There was no dramatic declaration between them, no moment of romantic revelation. What grew instead was something quieter and sturdier, a trust built not on chemistry or urgency, but on the simple accumulation of days in which one person showed up reliably for another. Callum started leaving before 7 to give her privacy. Serena started making extra coffee because she noticed he always looked like he needed it. Theo, who had been quiet and watchful in the way of children who have felt instability before they had words for it, began to laugh again, and the sound of it filled the apartment in a way that Callum found himself waiting for. 3 months after the night on the corner of Maple and 5th, Serena moved into an apartment of her own, small and bright, on the 4th floor of a building with a superintendent who had 3 cats and a habit of bringing her homemade soup. She bought yellow curtains. She found a daycare for Theo that he loved, with the wholehearted devotion that 3-year-olds bring to the things that make them feel safe. She rebuilt her freelance client base and started, slowly, to feel again like the woman who had once kept fresh flowers on her desk on Monday mornings. Not the same woman, because that woman hadn't known yet what she was capable of surviving, but a truer one, stronger in the places that had broken and healed. She and Callum had dinner the week she moved in, just the two of them, at the restaurant where they had first nearly collided in the snow. They talked about everything and nothing and laughed more than either of them had expected. And when they walked out into an evening that was finally, tentatively beginning to smell like spring, Serena thought about all the ways the night on the corner might have gone differently, all the doors that might have stayed closed, all the turns she might not have taken. She thought about how many Serenas were out there right now, standing in the snow somewhere, carrying a child and $14 and a whispered truth that the world wasn't ready to hear. She thought about how little it took to open a door. One moment of stillness, one decision not to keep walking, one plain and simple acknowledgement that another person was standing there in the cold and deserved to be warm. Before this story ends, we want to hear from you. Drop a comment below and tell us, has a stranger's kindness ever changed your life? Or have you ever been the one to open a door for someone? Your story might be the one that inspires someone else to do the same. Theo is 4 now, and he carries his teddy bear everywhere still, but he carries it differently, loosely, the way children carry things they trust they won't lose. On the day Serena hung her new yellow curtains, he stood in the middle of the living room and turned in a slow circle, looking at the room, looking at the light coming through the fabric, and he said with the complete and unqualified certainty that only very young children can manage, "Mama, this is our home." And Serena stood in her doorway and let herself cry, not the tight, silent crying of someone trying not to be seen, but the open, relieved, chest-deep crying of someone who has finally, after everything, arrived somewhere safe. She had whispered into the snow that they had nowhere to go, and somewhere in the universe, in the invisible machinery of chance and choice and one stranger who decided not to keep walking, the answer had come back clear and warm and true. You do now. If this story moved you, touched something real in your heart, please like this video, share it with someone who needs to remember that the world still has goodness in it, and subscribe so you never miss a story like this one. Every like, every share, every comment is a small act of kindness in itself. And kindness, as Serena and Callum remind us, is how everything changes.